Bonnie, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so we've also got people over here who have interesting innovations in the area of disability. Bonnie is one of them. Thank you so much for joining. And then we have people all the way from Uzbekistan. Fantastic. Amita Khan, thank you. Right, Lift 7 being well represented. Abdul Rahman out here, excellent. Lisa, thanks for making the time. Mike, good to see you again. Tutik joins us all the way from Indonesia. Welcome, Tutik.
Hello, good night.
Right.
Good afternoon there.
It's always night for you, Tutik. It's what, 9 o'clock, isn't it? Unfair to run at this time. But thank you so much for joining. Hi, Juliana. Good.
Hello, everyone.
Right, so good, it's a good crowd of 30. Wait, that's my representing Egypt. Alice, hi. Some new faces.
Hi.
Peter's also got innovation in this area. Fantastic. Welcome, welcome. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, joining our first World Awareness Day, International Day for people with disabilities. And there's a new mission out there about protecting the rights of the disabled post-COVID era out there. And we've got a very interesting panel out here. We got panelists from the higher education sector over here in the UK that are doing one of two things, either supporting students or creating opportunities and ecosystems for innovators in this area to flourish out there. So we've got people from UCL King's and the University of Suffolk. On the other side of the panel, we have innovators supported by the Royal Academy of Engineering. All of these people have been on the Leaders in Innovation Fellowships program out there, and some of them have done 3 programs with the Academy out there. I will be introducing each panelist one by one. Just to note, as I introduce Kathy, Professor Kathy Holloway from UCL, she's actually hosting an event at the same time because her Global Disability Innovation Hub has a parallel event running at the same time. I'm very grateful that she's chosen to be with us out there, but as a host, she has to launch the event, do the keynote bit, and then she'll join us about 2:15, 2:30 over here out there. So you can see Catherine Holloway out there, but she's on mute because she is focused on the other event for now out there. Right. So let me introduce the panelists to you, right? The context of this whole thing first, right? Almost 1 billion people. 15% of our people, and there's this hashtag We the 15, live with disabilities. Now, I saw this the first time at Paralympic Games. That's the first time that I was made aware of, of this staggering number. And I said, how big is this? And by population, it makes it the 3rd largest country behind India and China. I mean, it's that huge out there. And yet many of these are invisible to us. And that was one of the purpose of this event, and was to shed some light, some inspiration, some awareness in this, but also look at what the challenges are and what the opportunities can be. So let me introduce the panel members to you. Professor Kathy Holloway from UCL is the co-founder and academic director of the Global Disability Innovation Hub, and she's also professor at the UCL Interaction Center out there. I met Kathy 4 or 5 years ago when she was talking about a project she'd done in India, mapping the accessibility terrain of New Delhi, and she'd use wheelchair users to do that. So they are the ones who actually could sort of map the terrain out. That's when I met Kathy. So delighted she's here. She's pioneering the disability interaction framework to accelerate disability innovation for a fairer world. She's the co-PI of the 80-20-30 program. So 80 stands for assistive technology, 2030 is a number. And she's also the director and co-founder of 2 social enterprises. One is Movement Metrics, and the other is the GDI Hub Community Interest Company. So it's a CIC, that means a company that works in the interest of everybody who's working inside out there. So that's Kathy. Enzo, if you just want to say hi to the people, so then they know who you are, right?
Yes, of course. Right. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening.
So Enzo joins us from Peru. He's the general manager of LAT Bionics, a mechatronics engineer and a researcher of biomechanics and applied robotics lab at the Pontifical Catholic University of Peru. Special interest in haptic feedback for upper limb, amputation condition. He's been awarded the Young Leader of the Americas by the Department of State, US, and is a LIF Advanced Fellow from the Royal Academy of Engineering, and also a TEDx speaker. Welcome, Enzo. Good.
Thank you so much.
Right, and my screen's gone off. Right, next we have is Chantal. Now, Chantal spent her earlier years working in further education. She's from the University of Suffolk right now, a private provider, and in prison education settings. And when she was working in prison in the education setting, she realized that it wasn't so much about the education, but it was almost about the fact that there were learning disabilities that the residents of the prison had, which were going unrecognized. And she moved from that sector into further education, and she is now into higher education, where she provides information, advice, and guidance, and to the students. And she's also the safeguarding officer out there. She's as an assistant director. Next to Chantal is Barry Hayward. Barry is the head of disability support at King's College London. He has arthritis. Barry has worked in the sector for 11 years, and prior to working in higher education was a disability professional in the voluntary sector for many, many, many years, far too long for him to remember, as he informs me. And that's Barry. Barry, if you can just give us a wave, right? There we are. Good. Whoops, there you are. Right, good. And last, we have Brian. Brian is from Kenya. He's an alumni also of the programs, as I mentioned. He's done the LIF Advanced Africa Prize and the LIF program with the Royal Academy of Engineering. He is the 2019 winner of the Diversity and Inclusion Awards in Kenya, and is for Best Innovative and Inclusive Deployment of Technology. And Barry works in a particular technology area with assisting the blind people, and he's developed some pretty amazing assistive technologies out there. So that's our panel at the moment, and Kathy will join us in about 5-10 minutes. So I'm going to, the way we're going to run this is I've got a few questions that have already come our way, so I'm going to get started and ask the questions. I'll ask a few panel members to respond. We get those out of the way, and then I'm going to open up the floor and get you to ask anything and everything that you wanted to know about this area, because a lot of it is just not visible to us. And I'm sure one of the panel members will be able to respond to that. And then we'll finally finish off with some parting thoughts from the panelists, get your feedback and views as we always do. And that's how we're going to go. So my first question is, how did you, and this is to the panelists, and the question is, how did you get into this journey? So can I first ask Chantal from University of Suffolk to talk to us about it, please? Got a couple of minutes each, yeah? Thanks.
Thank you so much, and hello everybody. Thanks for inviting me to this. Yes, I was reflecting on this, and these conversations are always so helpful to realize where the journey that I've been taking as well. So part of my inspiration, as touched upon before, was started with sort of my guidance work within prison education setting, and that was hugely inspirational in terms of sort of charting the next parts of my career, when you looked at some of the tenacity and experiences that young offenders have had. And so certainly, as mentioned, we could see there sort of an underlying prevalence of specific learning difficulties, often sort of undiagnosed, undetected, but also some kind of social things going on there around time spent in care or gaps in education, and lower literacy attainment. So it was really interesting to see sort of the crossover and the intersectionality of some of those things going on, and thinking about actually how can we, through prison education, also help sort of people achieve their aspirations once they leave, and then go back into kind of education outside of the prison environment. And then after that, I've always been really I've really enjoyed working within education because of the opportunities that it can create, but you can recognize some of those barriers. And I joined the University of Suffolk at a time when there was no university in the county of Suffolk. There was some higher education within further education colleges. So the University of Suffolk was very much born out of creating opportunities to access higher education within a county. So it was a very exciting time to join. And we started off very small at that time. And over the years, I've learned so much through our students' experiences and then how we can evolve not just the delivery of our learning and teaching, but also the provision of any support as well.
Thank you, Chantal, and I'm sure we'll hear further from you on this. And I just wanted to move, whilst we're on the student experience with Barry, similarly, your trajectory into this space, please. Yeah.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm really thankful to be invited. To go back to my journey, I've been a user of services, I suppose, at the beginning of the journey. And I got an illness that turned out to be rheumatoid arthritis when I was at school. And I was a patient in the health service initially. And then I sought support. There are some organizations that help people with arthritis. I joined those. And over the years, I've been, I guess, an activist on the one hand. I became a disabled students officer at my university back in the 80s. And I've been an advocate for disabled people in a job. I won't go through my whole CV. It's rather boring. But what interests me and what I hope I can contribute today is the different levels that you can influence and how you need to take different approaches depending on who you're seeking to influence. Where I am now, I head a disability support team. We work directly with disabled students at King's to assist them to access their studies. But I also interact with senior managers to try and influence the policy of the institution. So through all my life, I found it interesting how there can be a different view, a mismatch sometimes between disabled people on the one hand, policymakers on the other hand, and then people who hold the purse strings on the other hand. And while I'm on that point, before I forget, I have to say hello to Viren from Darren Wallace, who is a senior manager at King's, who wanted me to say hello to you.
Thank you.
And it is very helpful for me to be here. I hope I can contribute today. But it is by being involved in forums outside of King's. I think my influence within King's can be enhanced. So yeah, that's a potted history of where I've got to.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Barry. And Abir, your views, please, on this. Your short journey into this. Yes.
Thank you, Beren. Thank you, Beren, for the invitation. Actually, I started working in mental health after my inward journey, where my emotions, feelings, and the responses and their impact on my life needs to be reflected on. So I started to navigate more into neuroscience and how our emotions are created and what's the impact of these emotions in our life experiences. Then started to work with coaches, then started to work with refugees and people with disabilities like autistic children, and see how their emotions affected their responses. All these interaction contributed a big deal into forming the journey that I'm working on through Larimar. So the challenge was, how can I transform these coaching techniques and human interaction between me and them into a technology to augment their life experiences and make their life and make them navigate their life in an easy manner. So yeah, this is the whole idea of Larimar, or the WillShift app that we are developing now.
Fantastic. And Abir's off to a resounding start. She's done a successful Kickstarter campaign, and I'm sure it's going to be a very, very successful journey. Kathy, welcome. Over to you. And it's a different question I have for you. The size of the problem there's this whole aspect about invisibility, the 15 out there. Can you talk, can you make the numbers sort of, shine out for us, like, how big is this in the world?
Well, I mean, I think it's massive, and I don't think it's 15. I think that's a huge understatement. So there's 15% of the world's population, you could argue, at any one time is living with a disability. But if you take my own personal journey, so I heard other people talk just as I joined. Sorry, I was late. I was running a bit late and some technical errors, and I was a little bit late. But my childhood wasn't particularly easy. I had a very traumatic childhood. I was nearly put into care lots of times, and that's taken quite a lot to overcome. And so I had I pushed myself really hard, really hard. I worked 80-hour weeks. I became an academic. I got my PhD. I ran a massive lab within UCL. And then I basically had a breakdown. And then was signed off for a couple of weeks where I was told, you're suicidal. That's what's wrong with you. And I said, don't be stupid. I'm going to have a meeting with High Speed Rail 2 this afternoon. And they said, no, you're not. Like, you really need to stop. And so I think that when you start to look, and I've been uncovering this more and more, actually partly, again, from personal experience, I've been looking into adopting children, and I stumbled across the statistics of like how many people live from abuse just in the UK, for example. And over 10% of adults have experienced childhood abuse. And that's a shocking figure, right? So, and I can't imagine anybody that then goes through life and is perfectly fine for the rest of their life. I just don't think that's possible, right? I think we develop a myriad of coping mechanisms, or we become substance abusers, or something else occurs. So on the one hand, we've got this medical, initially medical, now social disability that looks at, when our abilities don't match what's needed, we have a disability, right? And I would argue, especially during the pandemic, how many people have gone, I'm absolutely overwhelmed and incredibly anxious and stressed and unable to do things. So I think there's two problems here, and they're very difficult. And within the Global Disability Innovation Hub, we're trying to navigate both of them at the same time. On the one hand, and this comes back to what was mentioned earlier by Barry about trying to influence at different levels. On the one hand, you need a number, let's say it's 15%, vaguely accurate probably in terms of medical levels of disability. And we need governments and major funders to understand that there needs to be health provision, education provision, and sort of accessibility gap provision to make sure people who are living with a permanent long-term condition get access to that help. So that's definitely needed, and we need to influence things like universal healthcare, so that countries like, say, where Brian's based in Kenya, that when they launch universal healthcare, assistive products and services are built into that. We also need to make sure the children that are going to school are able to get access to the technology they need to learn, and we need to make sure that when people go to work, they get access to the facilities they need to engage just with that, like everybody else in their workplace. But on the other hand, I think there's this argument where we have to begin to realize that there's a spectrum of ability, and that all of us at some point, every human I've ever met has a breaking point. And sometimes that comes after your third child, or sometimes it comes because both your parents are diagnosed with Alzheimer's, or sometimes it comes because someone you love dies in a road traffic accident, or sometimes it comes because your country was invaded by another country and suddenly you're a refugee, right? But there's this massive amount of trauma as well, I think, that means that we underestimate this number that is 15%, and then also we underestimate the experience of that 15%, right? So it's very disproportionate. So most 15% live in low and middle income countries. Most within those low and middle income countries live in poverty. And if you're trying to get basic access to shelter, basic access to water, sanitation, how do you advocate for assistive technology? How do you say, hang on, I also need a wheelchair? If you also need somewhere to live. And so these social justice themes are, I think, really problematic in terms of how we grow the field, if you like, which is an inclusive, innovative field, which I know the RAN is very keen to do. I'll be quiet now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We'll come back to you because I think there's also the opportunity aspect of the size of the market that GDI talks about. So I want to move on from Kathy to actually someone Kathy is actively supporting, Brian. If you can, there you are, right? So Brian, again, what's this? You work in the area of visual impairment. It'll be good for you to, if you could just share the couple of things that you've developed, not massive things that you're developing in this area, but also shed some light on, how many people does this thing affect, right? In the area of visual impairment.
Thanks, Viren. So I remember, I think the first time I interacted with someone was physically disabled. I think I was around 15 or 16 years old. And then I went to look at the numbers of maybe people living with disabilities, and you find like it's almost like 1 in every 5 people has a physical disability. And the representation in the society was, I think, non-existent. You find in meetings, in all the events you attend, that really there isn't participation for people with disabilities. And for me, actually, that was thanks to a program here in Kenya by the Kenyan government. So the Kenyan government is trying to actively do away with the special schools and move more into integration, because one of the 2 main problems I find, like the big ones facing people with disabilities, include the social stigma, or just the ignorance of the many people. And also, I think some people don't develop some solutions just because they don't know. So such kind of policies really help to bring the kind of awareness that is really needed in the society. So I'm a really big supporter of having conversations like this one. I don't know if this is politically correct, but normalizing these kinds of conversation, because we interacted with so many people with disabilities, just like you and I. So they don't need a special society to live in. We just have to make it more inclusive. And the other big problem that I found out was they found the lack of assistive devices to interact with the environment, to perform certain tasks. And this was a big challenge. So when I went to do engineering, and with the little engineering background I had, I immediately started on working on assistive technologies for persons with disabilities. And I immediately started with visual impairment, because that's where my immediate friends are lay. So I found myself in a space that was so wide to even scratch the surface. So we started with mobility for visually impaired people. And it's been, I think right now, almost going into 6 years. And we still believe there's a long way to go. So I think the message that at the end of this conversation I want to leave is just to encourage more people to get into the space and build more products. There's a lot of potential. There's a huge market, and we need as many people as possible. Thanks.
That's a good message for the engineering innovators amongst us out there. And we'll get back to Brian and Kathy in terms of what's that ecosystem of support available. And Brian, by the way, is running trials for blind veterans in Australia, supported by University College London over here, and also in Austria, has collaborated with India, and obviously has been through Africa Prize and the Leaders in Innovation Fellowship Program. So massive, massive support available for people who want to sort of venture into this space. And that brings me in a very nice manner to Enzo. Enzo, what's the size of the problem? You know, you had some views and figures on this one.
Yes. So regarding what Professor Holloway was speaking to, I couldn't be more agree with her. I'm from Peru, and here a crucial aspect about it is the social injustice that exists in our country. So for example, in my case, as you can see, I was born without my right hand. And ever since I watched Star Wars #5, where Luke gets a hand again, and it's a human hand that also looks like a human hand, but also had a feeling sensation, was the set point for me to say, I want a prosthesis like that. And throughout my entire life, that was my dream. I didn't know if I needed to buy it one. I didn't know if I needed to build it one for myself. Well, eventually I get to do that way. I've studied mechatronics engineer, as you said, and belong a part of a research program at my university. There, we developed in 2017 the very first prosthesis that was designed and developed in Peru with myoelectric actuation and so. But it was during that research that I discovered that I was obviously not the only one in my country. Actually, we are more about 2.4 million people with upper limb amputation condition in developing countries. Of those, 12,600 exist in Peru, both from congenital cases, but also from work accidental cases. And there, as Professor Holloway was saying, the 50% is an approximation number, because, for example, in our country, our Secretary of Work reports at least 30 new cases per month due to hand injuries in work-related accidents. But in Peru, 7 out of 10 companies are informal. So that means that only 3 out of them reports to the Secretary of Work. That means there is a whole universe that we do not have access data. Those are people that are not into universal healthcare system in Peru and so. And probably that is the worst scenario that might get to you if you had a hand injury or lost your limb while you were working. First, because probably you're working on a company that isn't going to give you insurance to buy the very basic prosthesis, which is a hook type prosthesis. But on the second place, if you want to buy it for yourself, a hook type prosthesis can cost 1,000 pounds here in Peru. And my electric robotic prosthesis imported from US, for example, can cost you at least the initial payment for a new apartment here in Peru. And for someone that has been living with 3,000 pounds, which is our monthly life wage here in Peru, it is impossible to acquire a decent prosthesis. And that is the very beginning of the problem, because once you have lost your arm or your hand, probably you have lost your work too. Probably you lost the capacity to give your family money because you were the one person that was running the family business and so. And that is from the economic side. And also from the emotional side, you already are a person with a disability and you need months to pass in order to realize that now you're a person with a disability and now this new condition set up the entire path that you are going to take next, right? And that's why we've created our company, where we can match how can we develop high quality prosthesis, but keeping it on a low cost so that can be accessible to everyone in our country and in Latin America. Thank you so much.
Lovely, thank you, Enzo. Thank you for your inputs on that one. And it's really interesting, right? Because it's not just the numbers, it's the impact that it has on the others who depend on you, and the knock-on effects out there. And you know, that one of these things costs a down payment of a house is just absolutely staggering. Right, so we'll move on from that onto student life out there. So Barry, can you share an example where, in dealing with disability in the King's environment, where you actually came up with an elegant, effective solution to what was seemingly a hard problem to solve?
Well, I've worked on systems. I'm not an engineer, and I'd love to give an example of some technical developments we've introduced. There was a big leap forward, I'd say, in the university sector that was imposed on us by the COVID restrictions. And that was on the digital environment. Things like Zoom, as we're using today, became a tool in education that hadn't really been used before. And it was of great interest to me and other people working in disability that we'd had lots of students saying, if we could just have video recordings of lectures, we'd be able to access them a lot easier. And it was always seemingly a problem. And then suddenly, overnight, almost, we introduced these systems. So that's nothing to do with me, but that's an innovation that circumstances drive. And that always interests me. People likened life under COVID to be in a wartime environment. It's interesting how when you look back at previous conflicts, it's driven innovation. So I'm not suggesting we should encourage conflict and further restrictions, but hopefully we learn from those negative experiences how innovation can actually come quite quickly. And I'm trying to hold on to that in my institution. I was thinking about this, the thing I feel has got the most potential, but it's still a work in progress, is that I've looked at the interplay really between individual solutions and, in a King's context, institutional solutions. And you know, you could replicate this in other organizations, but also in society generally, that we can focus on individuals and look at equipment and prosthetics and tailor solutions around an individual. And that can really enhance somebody's independence. But I think we should also look at what could we do about the institution to make things more accessible, more open, to reduce the need on individual solutions. So I'll give you one example that I'm most pleased about. Most universities have an individual plan for disabled students. that the individual is assessed and somebody like me talks to them and says, right, we can help you with this. We can ask your teaching staff to do this, and we can put in place these resources for you. It's called a King's Inclusion Plan at King's. Other universities call it a learning support plan or an inclusion plan or an adjustments plan, that sort of thing. What I have worked on is that faculties at King's have an accessibility statement. And I'm saying this is the department and the faculty's plan to be accessible. And what you need to do is tell your students, this is what your teaching staff do to be accessible. This is what your assessment processes do to be accessible. And what it does in effect really is highlight where there are barriers. And what I'm hoping is that by being honest about this, we're not just saying what's accessible, we're kind of acknowledging what's not accessible. And that, I'm starting to see it. And as I say, it's a work in progress, but I've got to believe that it will lead to pressure for organization-wide change to be more accessible. Because we talk about it a lot, but people then say, well, what do we need to do? So I think the first thing you do is acknowledge what you've not got right. So the statement is, this is what we do, but it also kind of indicates what we don't do. And my push is that every faculty has one and that it's updated and reviewed every year. So it doesn't become a one-off exercise. You've all probably heard of access audits where, and there was that mapping exercise we heard about in New Delhi. Hopefully that wasn't done once. Really, to be effective and to benefit everybody, you need to revisit these things at least every year.
Barry, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Zach has joined us. Zach joined us actually half an hour early, but he's, I think, joining us again now. So it's fantastic. Right. I want to go to Brian. And Brian, so assistive technology, you work in assistive technology. It'd be good, we haven't really mentioned, it'd be good for you to talk, give a very brief thing. What is Sixth Sense about, what you're working on, right? But then tell us also what makes it hard? What makes getting assistive technology off the ground difficult?
Thanks, Viren. So I think the challenge that we have in this space is that we don't have a lot of previous technologies that exist in the space.
Sorry, Brian, can you also tell them, because they don't know what your invention is? I think if you could
All right, yeah. So, our company is called Hope Tech Plus, and we build mobility assistive devices for visually impaired people. And right now we have a really interesting product called the Sixth Sense. So it's going to be like one of the first products to replace the white canes for blind people. So right now it's a just wearable device. So you mount the device at a high level where it has some sensors to scan the environment in front of you. And then it will assess any threats or any obstacles that a person may encounter and give feedback to the user through haptics. These are just vibration patterns on the belt itself and also on two bracelets. So we're trying to make it very easy for someone to tell exactly what is in front of them. So you'll have different vibration patterns for different kinds of obstacles. So it's very easy for visually impaired people to move like with this one. So previously we've had some smart canes in the market, but we're trying to move away from this because still many visually impaired people feel like using the white canes is a symbol to tell people like visually impaired, or it doesn't have that kind of privacy that they may need. And for people who still want to use the white cane, we can use a symbol cane, which is a shorter, less bulky cane, still with the device. So we're trying to come up with a more comprehensive solution to someone who is visually impaired for mobility. And I think the main challenge we've been facing is that there isn't much work that has been done in the past. So we are moving from a very non-tech solution, this is the white cane, into a very sophisticated wearable product. So we're building all the hardware, we have to interact with a lot of visually impaired people through trials, through workshops and all these seminars, just to try to understand what kind of product that will solve the problem of mobility for them. I think one of the interesting things is that we've been working with people from very different countries, and still the problem of mobility for visually impaired people is almost very similar. So a product that has been done in Kenya can be used in India, can be used in the UK, in the US. So for anyone thinking of an exciting space with products very scalable, I think the AT space is very, the assistive technology space is very open for that. So anything you build can be scaled to any person with disability anywhere in the world. And I think the challenge that we'll be facing is that we're working with something that gives someone the autonomy, the independence to move around. So it's going to be interesting to see if we can overcome the challenge that maybe people with self-driving cars have, where you have 99% accuracy, but then the 1% is the one which is very important for them to really trust the product. And this is the next phase that we're going with, where we're working with Kathy and a few other partners across the world to test the products, the prototypes we have, and build the final products, which we hope will be available for all visually impaired people across the world very soon.
Thank you, Brian. And when you and I were chatting, you did mention, right? It looks like you're working in the charity sector, but actually it's a hugely commercially viable thing and a huge market out there. And thanks also for the analogy of the driverless cars. It's not good enough in the space Brian's working in to be 99%, right? The last mile, the last inch is very important, 1%. So Kathy, over to you in terms of really moving into this assistive technology market that you have out there. And you've got some very interesting stats on the GDI website. If you just talk about the market access and the potential in this space, please. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So GDI Hub, when we started working on assistive technology, we did a number of landscaping studies, and we did those with the Clinton Health Access Initiative, and we looked at specific products and how we could shape the markets of those specific products. Everything from prosthetics, wheelchairs, hearing aids, digital, including mobile, but also screen readers and others, and eyeglasses, or just glasses if you're not American. And what you find is, so the market opportunity is massive, right? So there's massive unmet need. 90% of the people that need devices don't get access to that product or the service. We know that a standard cost benefit analysis, just something very simple, rudimentary, where you look at how much a government might regain in tax returns if somebody was employed, and how much they don't then give out in social welfare or in health, in critical health cover, shows a simple figure of $9 return for each $1 invested across those products. So we know that if you invest in it, you'll get a good return on investment, but actually the return on investment goes further. So at UCL, we've been working with the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, that's Mariana Mazzucato's group, to look at if you actually took a mission approach to this and said, actually, assistive technology is part of a wider mission of disability inclusive investment, right? We want our societies to be disability inclusive. And then you begin to look at these product sectors. So let's say, Brian's looking at devices for visually impaired people to navigate. Glasses could come under that. You begin to look at these product spaces, and you don't just look at the individual return to the family or individual return to the person in the cost benefit analysis, but you begin to look at both the upstream and downstream value. So if you've got to get glasses to people, somebody or some system has to provide them. So you might end up with ophthalmologists, for example. The other things that you might need are actually the glasses. So how are you going to get the glass, the lenses? Lenses tend to be produced by 5 companies globally, but the actual glass frames, there's lots of different mechanisms, local production possibilities for developing those. And then you begin to get to an additional 11 in 1 return on investment. So at surface value, it's like there's a huge need, and actually the return on investment when it's done well is obvious, right? Most of us, if you had £1 million, £100, and you thought you'll get 20 to 1 return, you'd go, oh, that's all right. I'll do that, right? That's not a bad idea. So then you have to ask yourself the question of so why isn't it happening? I mean, so there has to be a reason, right? There has to be a reason. And so I think there's a nexus of 3 things, I think, which are changing, which are meaning it's more possible that weren't there previously. So the first thing is, I think people are beginning to understand inclusive investment, and that's mostly, and so the people that are coming to us, like the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, the IFC, the major investors in infrastructure, they're coming to us once they've been through the gender experience. And GSMA was the same in mobile phones. They've suddenly realized, 50% of the population didn't have access to something, oftentimes in lower resource settings. And actually, when we begin to give, say, women access to mobile phones, then all of a sudden there's this added benefit. There's these cascading effects economically to an area. And so they see that, and the extended logic is, well, why not disabled? After doing that for a few years, they suddenly go, hang on, there's these people with disabilities, they're important too, right? So I think that that's one thing that's happening, is people are seeing that inclusive investment actually does work. And also I think people are beginning, I think COVID has helped with this, people are beginning to appreciate disability as not being people who are charitable and can't do things, but beginning to see people they knew as high-flying people that work really hard being cut down for a couple of months with long COVID, and going, hang on a minute, it's not lazy people that don't do things, it's just a person, they've got an illness that now can't do something. So I think there's this global shift in understanding, as well as beginning to understand the benefit. The second thing is the technology. I mean, Brian couldn't be developing what he was doing 10 years ago. It wouldn't be affordable. And all of a sudden, mobile infrastructure, that sensing technology, the sort of Internet of Things, but without the things, the actual more the sensing bit is unlocking possibilities for anybody to begin to apply a solution. And thirdly, the infrastructure is getting better. So it's been over 10 years since the UN Convention for Persons with Disability. We've not seen a shift in that figure. If you go back to the ADA in the USA, since the American Disabilities Act was implemented, no shift in the figure of disabled people employed, none, same proportion. That doesn't matter that they have that factor. You go to Safaricom in Africa, in Kenya, and they're like one of the major companies in Kenya who are desperate to get to that 5% quota set by government of employment of persons with disability. They went from 1.3 or 7 at the first Global Disability Summit. They're now at about 2.5, 2.8. They can't get to 5 because the infrastructure is not there. So visually impaired people can't interact. They either haven't had the education, there's a legacy of a lack of education, or the physical infrastructure, and therefore the digital infrastructure is not there. And that is slowly changing. So when, for example, when I talked at the beginning about World Bank, the Asian Development Bank and others, we're beginning to help them develop, how would you give a bump, for example, to making sure something's inclusively investable in, right? And what we saw in the Paralympic Games, for example, in London in 2012, you couldn't get a contract to be a contractor on the London 2012 Games if you didn't treat the Paralympics and disability inclusion, and actually inclusion more widely, as important. So it wasn't enough. Let's say, for example, you were tendering to do the cars, the vehicles that were going to get athletes to and around London and the important people that landed at Heathrow to where they wanted to go. You couldn't just say my vehicle will be accessible. You had to say, 8%, 9% of my population have a disability. You had to explain what was the split in ethnicity, what was the split in gender. People cared about that. You couldn't buy the advertising for your MasterCard or Channel 4. You couldn't get the advertising rights for the Olympics without the Paralympics. So that disability inclusion was built into that contract stage. And I think that people like the ADB and others, that infrastructure piece, people are increasingly wondering, how do we do it from the beginning? We're not going to go and build a new city, a new airport, a new school, a new education system without making sure they've got an inclusive delivery plan. And so I think that between those, the fact that major investments unlocking the system makes it easier for people like Brian to plug into that better infrastructure, but also people with disabilities or disabled people globally are having a slightly better, even if it's very low resource setting, still a bit better opportunities. And that cumulative effect means that there is more money in the system to begin to invest in stuff. And so I'll just finish with one thing, which is just that one of the things we've been testing in a couple of places, so upper limb prosthetics by a company called Koala in Sierra Leone, and HearX in Kenya. So they do hearing aid screening via a mobile phone, and the South African company, and we've been testing rolling out in Kenya. Both of them have been looking at different financing models and beginning to see how could you get almost like a pay-as-you-go model, or chipping away at the finances. So if the person can only pay, if you take British pounds, and the device costs £1, let's say, what if the person can only pay 2 pence, but the school can contribute 5 pence, and the local healthcare system could contribute 7%, and then you've got some sort of bond that's got a 10-year return that will contribute some money. And how do we break that down into a functioning, multifaceted finance model? So, and then in the Kenya example, we've just been looking at 3 different models. Like, can we get a healthcare company? Can we get a company to pay for the hearing aids? With like almost pay as you earn, if you like. And then the pay-as-you-go model of like, as you're using it, you're paying it off. So people begin to continue to feed into it. So hopefully, Vivian, that was enough.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. And by the way, Kathy's team does a lot of work, not just in the technology aspect, I mean, at the Interaction Center and this thing, but they do a lot of policy forming work for some of these major banks, in terms of how they should shape their impact investing out there. So thank you very much, Kathy, for that. And thank you also for the insights into innovative financing methods. And I know we shared some of those earlier in terms of business model innovations of literally renting the services or pennies a day pricing as we call it in strategy out there. Right. Can I just say, panelists, thank you so much for almost running a parallel show and keeping the questions answered and going along. That's been absolutely, because I've been just glued to what you guys are saying, but there's a parallel stream that's running out there, and it's a great time now to open it up to the audience, guys. So I would just say, if your question has not been answered so far, please feel free to ask, and maybe give me the right to direct you to one of the panelists. Please go ahead.
Hi, Viren. I'll just quickly reiterate the question that I posed in the chat. Basically, I just wanted to understand, is there a set of standard guidelines laid down by the respective governments to measure the inclusiveness of any university or college? So maybe some quick comments from Brian, Enzo, Kathy.
Sorry. Bonnie, can I just say, so I'm going to repeat the question, and it's already there in the chat. Is there a standard set of guidelines laid down by the government in your respective geographies to measure inclusiveness of any university or college? And if they do it, how do they do it? So Enzo, it's directed to you, but I would then also defer to Barry and Chantal on that. Yeah,
sure. So, for example, in Peru, we have a government organization called CONADIS, which is a national producer of people with disabilities. And so far, what we've been doing is they've been signing up people that was born with a disability or had a disability, and in order to have access to sort type of advantages, like, for example, if you have a cerebral disability, the public transportation is free to use for you and one accompanying, something like that. And in that level, having a census of what is the type of disability, what is the age and ethnicity of the person, is giving our government the chance to have figure out somehow how is this percentage of people with disabilities in Peru. If they are working right now, if they have left their work because of the disability, what are their plans to do with on the future? So if it is not like inclusiveness term at all, but I think it is separate in very specific pieces.
All right, lovely. Thank you, Enzo. Chantal, is any similar reflection in the college and university space, please?
Sure. Yeah, I popped in the chat just a framework that we have used to help guide learning and teaching to being more inclusive, which is the Universal Design for Learning. And we're exploring how we might put that into course design blueprints, as in what might be sort of minimum standards. Other things that come up are probably similar. We also have an access and participation plan, which asks us to really understand what our inequality gaps are, and then to specifically address those. And so for us, it's all in the public domain. We know that students with mental health conditions are more likely to drop out of their studies, and students with disabilities are less likely to get first-class degrees or 2-1, so higher class degrees. So that's, I think, understanding what and where your inequalities are, and then looking at how you're tackling it is another aspect.
Fantastic. And Barry, if there's anything you'd like to add to that, please.
Yes. One thing I'm trying to support this year is our Students' Union. Disabled students traditionally at King's, and I think it's the same in other universities, have found it difficult to use the Students' Union as a forum to raise their concerns. I think part of it is that when you're a disabled student, you've got a lot on your plate to deal with. So becoming a representative of other students is just one more thing to do, but also the time scale of the way the annual year in a university works doesn't give a lot of time for students to get together and make a case. But I'm trying to encourage that, because I think the student voice is often lost, and it's left to people like me as staff and then policymakers to look at these things. So that's one thing I think is an element to it. Until we say disabled students have told us we're doing a good job, I don't think we can pat ourselves on the back too much. I think the universal design for learning is a great principle that I think all universities should be measured against. That's something I would like to see. And then the final point I'd make, we have in the UK is a thing called Disabled Students Allowance. And it's a good thing in principle. It's government funding for individual disabled students to have the equipment and potentially support they might need to engage with university study. It's a good thing in that it's portable. If you move university, you can take it with you. However, I think it's put up a little barrier for progress in some respects, in that I think academic staff have generally not had to worry too much in the UK about disabled students' access, because the support provided through things like disabled student allowance has kind of helped them. And this is where I was referring earlier to the tension between an organisation looking at its accessibility and individual solutions. And I think we've kind of got the balance wrong. So I'd like to see us looking at that. We have looked at it before in the UK. There were some changes that a couple of years ago to disabled students allowance that really drove some change. But I think we need to keep doing that. Is yes, by all means, we should fund support for individuals. But I think when that's a barrier to the organisation becoming more accessible, that's a problem. So those are areas we need to monitor. But it's very broad brush, as I think we put in the chat, in terms of how it's monitored.
Thank you, Barry. Sorry, keeping on pace. I think we've got a chance for one more question. And Mai from Egypt, if you can go ahead, please, with or without camera, with your choice.
Thank you very much. In fact, I would like to ask the panelists interested in education if they are using learning style assessments, and if they can find it really helpful with students with learning difficulties or mental learning disabilities. Because in fact, my innovation is a learning style assessment tool that is related to the neurology of the brain, and in fact, I'm really interested that it can help, especially with those with mental disabilities or learning difficulties at different stages of their education life.
Right. Who would like to go now? Go ahead.
I'd like to link up with you if I can, Maya. I'd be very interested in what you're doing. I think it's potentially a really good development in terms of targeting an intervention that can support learning. In the UK, we've tended to do very broad brush assessments and then provided learning support, and it's been worked out with the individual as it's gone along. And I think I haven't seen particularly good assessments of learning styles to help design learning solutions for students. So I'd be very interested in hearing more about what you do.
Okay. Well, we will connect the two of you up out there.
Thank you.
Now that you've given us the GDPR permission out there. Abir, I'm just going to hold on to you for now. Shahrukh, well, let's make that the last. And you, Abir, just put the question on chat and we'll find some way to get it answered, just keeping conscious of time. Shahrukh, go ahead, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm kind of new to this. I'm developing a device. I'm an engineer, but I'm trying to develop a device for my mother originally. She is old and suffers from a variety of issues, including arthritis. And typically she has asymmetrical ability. So one day the left leg works and the right leg doesn't work. And then one day the right arm works and the left leg doesn't work, etc. But due to a variety of other conditions that she has, she needs to exercise. So well, I can't find any device that she will be able to exercise, especially lying down in bed. Lying down in bed and exercising asymmetrically is something that I've not been able to find. So I basically went ahead and developed the idea for a device that will allow basically anybody with any ability to exercise symmetrically or asymmetrically using their limbs. and you can set the resistance to match the person's ability at the time of use. My difficulty is I cannot find, I'm an engineer, so I don't have any background in the medical world. I can't find any grant body that will actually support me developing the device. Anyone who has any background in developing med tech devices, any advice that you may be able to give me, that would be of enormous value. Thank you very much.
Right. I mean, so I think best if we put this one in chat, and I might just ask the panelists, you know, by all means, just write back into me, and because it'll be a series of links, and I will make sure that I will get that across to Shahrukh.
I will do that. Thank you very much.
All right, lovely, good. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. We're coming towards the end. We've got a bunch of things to do. So, very quickly, I'm going to ask the panelists, really briefly, right? What's the one thing that you want to leave our audience with as a parting thought on this fairly wide topic that we've discussed out there? So, in no particular order, I'm going to go with you first, Abir.
Yeah, thank you, Beren. I have 3 things to share with innovators, with families with disabilities. It's related to one theme that is dealing with more, let's say, empathy and embracing the difference between the differences of the people with disabilities will make them thrive, because with my contact with anyone who has a disability, whether physical or mental disability, if they're working, they are working hard on themselves and they are having impact in our life. So just dealing with them with acceptance and empathy, they will thrive and has a great impact for our communities. That's all.
Thank you. Barry, over to you, sir.
There's so much, but I'll pick one. Talk about disability, make it normal, make it open. People today have shared their own experience and how that's brought them to where we are today. I think just putting it out there and talking about it, making it an everyday conversation, normalizes disability. Going back to what Kathy said at the beginning, it affects everybody. So just talk about it. That would be my big thing.
All right, lovely. Thank you, Barry. Chantel.
Thank you. At the risk of repeating some of my colleagues.
You'll remember it then, go for it.
No, but I would absolutely agree with that, talking about it. Some of the most insightful conversations I've had have been when somebody's really taken quite a lot of their own time to really help me understand how something could be different. And I've learned so much through that. So being open and curious and kind, I think, Abir, as you say, absolutely. And I think, Kathy, you were touching earlier around kind of the concepts of trauma that people experience. I would absolutely agree with that. I think people are experiencing a lot at the moment. So being compassionate to that.
Lovely, thank you. And Kathy.
So as everyone else said too, I'll have two. My personal one is to go with what Shantali and Barry said, and be kind and compassionate. I say to everybody, when you come into a conflict these days, always try and give the best interpretation of the other person's actions and work from there. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think with my GDI Hub director hat on, I would say this is a growth area. It genuinely is a growth area. And I think that in future, you'll begin to see some amazing emerging like new ways of doing things. So we're working on a product that's got haptic technology that's for blind and visually impaired people, but actually we're now talking to the automotive industry. They're thinking this is really interesting, it's a new technology. So if I honestly, if you're a young entrepreneur or an older entrepreneur, I really would encourage you to join and grow this area together with kindness.
Lovely, thank you. Brian.
Thanks, Viren. Yeah, so I think I share the same thoughts as Kathy. I believe there's an opportunity for everyone to come into this space. Like 1 billion people is a lot of people. Within the next 10 years, that will be 2 billion. So whatever anyone is developing out there, let accessibility and inclusiveness be at the initial points of the design and the development, but not as an addition or at a later stage. So I'd encourage everyone to think about inclusiveness, think about accessibility, and let's keep this conversation going. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. And Enzo?
Yes, to those social entrepreneurs out there, do not stop developing your technology. I, from a personal experience, can guarantee you that it's so frustrating when on a startup competition, another delivery for goods company gets the prize money that might help for your company to advance. But you understand that because of what you're doing can impact on one person's life at that big scale, that's enough. So please do not stop developing your technology, and thank you for being our voice, and thank you for being our hands.
Fantastic. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I may take a couple of other minutes to bring this to a close. I want to share, so this is, like I said, a World Awareness Day event. The day was actually on Friday, the 3rd of December, but we run this on the 8th. We're having another one of these fantastic ones coming up in February, and it is the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. It's on the 9th of February, the same time out there. I heard some women in tech conversations out here, so I would love to have it. Kathy, if you can nominate people. Again, it's although it's run by the Academy and it's called Leaders in Innovation Fellowships, it is open to the public to bring the debate and the awareness out there. My lovely assistant Nadira will share the link for you in the chat. The best thing you could do is just register. So I'd encourage you to do that. So that's something that we can action in here and now. And we will send this also to you in a follow-up email. That will happen by close of play today. And last but not the least, we would love to get your feedback. I mean, it's been the panelists have done a brilliant job of not only sharing their views, but also answering the questions. We will answer questions for Shahrukh, and so we will do the connects for Shahrukh and Mai as promised after the call. I am just going to launch this poll up, and it's on a scale of 1 to 10. How likely are you to recommend this webinar or event to other members? And this is actually more open. It's not just LIFT community members, but the public. So I'm just going to launch it now and be grateful if we can get your feedback in there. 10 very likely, 1 very unlikely. Yeah. Whilst it's happening, can I just thank the panelists? Kathy, thank you so much for not only just taking time, but taking time out of your own event to be here. So it's a real privilege to have you and the other panelists. Thank you so much for making the last minute adjustment. Appreciate that. Barry, thank you very much. Please also pass my regards back to Darren out there, doing a lot of work with King's, and it's really a privilege to be. And I'm also King's alum, so that makes it really, really cool. Chantel, thank you very much. And please thanks GUPS from our side for nominating you. Really, it was a pleasure and privilege to have you on board. Brian, great to see your trajectory. You never stop. The man doesn't stop at all. He's consumed all the programs, everything has got to offer, and he's going places. Thank you so much. Abir, thank you so much out here. Start of the journey, and wish you really lots of luck out there and sharing what's really been a personal part of your journey. And Enzo, thank you so much again for your openness and sharing, how people may see it differently. And for you, it's your dream come true out there to build something for yourself. So that's been absolutely amazing. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to the Royal Academy of Engineering for putting these events across out there. It's, personally for me, it's been hugely informative, and it's a different conversation for me in the future. I hope it's been the same for you. And we look forward to seeing you at the next event very soon. Thank you very much.